I'm great. Good morning.
Well, I almost said good morning to you. Good evening to you.
Thank you. It's yeah, the sun is set now, so it is evening officially.
I was just thinking it's crazy. It's 10,000 miles between us, well, which
Man.
is 16,000 kilometers, right? Which
Yeah.
I was just thinking of the route that like electricity has to travel and go down and back. I mean, it's crazy that this is even possible. You know what I mean?
Oh, dude, if we were to run that, that would probably take us 5 years between us.
Right. And there'd be some swimming involved too.
Maybe a little.
All right. I want to first ask you about waiting. All right. Like I've been struggling. I've been wanting to do some films. I don't know. Do you know who Bo Miles is?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Big fan.
Yeah. Same here. I love the stuff he does. And I've been wanting to try to do some running films. And I've been trying to think about how to make running interesting. And it's a struggle. And then I see your video and I'm like, I'm I'm humbled in a way because you did a video of nothing, of just waiting around. And uh, I've watched it a handful of times. Anybody that's watching this video, I'm gonna put a little link to this to it. Stop, go watch the video. What is it, like 4 minutes? It's very well done, and you did something of nothing, which is amazing. Can you talk me through like how the idea came to you and the whole process?
Absolutely, Ben. Yeah. Thank you, first of all, for your kindness in watching it more than once. I really appreciate that. In in many senses, the video came about purely because of I guess the phone in my hand. There was this almost guilt that I had an instrument to make something with, but I didn't necessarily have the content. And in the nature of the job in which I showcase in this video, I almost felt almost like there was a creativity that I needed to put out into the world. Maybe not publicly, maybe it didn't have to be publicly, but I felt a sense on this particular day to let those creative juices out. And my phone being the only camera that I had on me in this sense, I'm a photographer by trade. That's what I did previously in London. I taught photography and I've studied at university. And I think, as probably all artists, I think we all share this desire to create. And I don't know about all of us, but I definitely felt guilt when there's been a little bit of time since the last thing that I posted. And I guess waiting came about as an idea, as a concept before I shot anything, of waiting to produce something worthy or at least share something worthy from my time in Australia. And I've been here for 6 months and I haven't really shot anything. Truth be told, I've got a couple of cameras here that I haven't picked up. I haven't loaded a roll of film into either of them. And after 6 months, I guess enough was enough. And, to put it simply, there's probably a clear reference for you all. If any of you are interested in film, Wes Anderson, one of my absolute heroes. Just on that day, I was looking at the instrument in that video. It's called a stacker, and the yellow stacker in front of me, it just lined up so well with the horizon. This isn't a coincidence. The instruments are actually lined up that way to perform their job, but just the level nature of this stacker, I just thought that looked so pleasing, and that's really where the movie came about. While I was waiting for these trucks, and there was an essence here, Ben, where I thought this is such a temporary moment. I'm only doing this job for 3 months, and yeah, I guess someone from the company could see it. Maybe I'll get in trouble for making movies at work, but in a way, I almost felt like, okay, I'm guilty that I haven't produced content in this crazy age of, 1,000 images a second being published online. There's that guilt, but there's also a sense here where I'm like, man, if I don't make this, who else will? And I guess that is probably your answer if you were to ask me, why do I shoot? Why do I make movies? why do I have the YouTube channel? I'm kind of scared no one else will, and I feel a responsibility there.
Your imagery that you captured is stunning. I mean, and I'm in my head, I'm thinking, what a contrast from London. I mean, like I feel like I'm looking at a different planet in some of it. I mean, I recognize the images and what I'm looking at, but it's very it's very well shot. Like I feel like it could be the start to like a Mad Max movie too. Like it could be the start to something more. You know, like it's gonna go somewhere, and it's very compelling.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's a craft I find really, really quite pleasing, to be honest. Framing and I guess having a visual sense and a visual idea of a production before it happens, aligning those ingredients, and hopefully pulling off something that works. You know, this, as I say, I shot on my phone, but there was time spent in Premiere. You know, lining this thing up, I guess, cooking with those ingredients. And in many ways, as I said, I am a photographer, but I really, as I'll discuss, I hope, transitioned into being a filmmaker. And I think that's come from perhaps the limits I found within photography. So thank you, Ben, for mentioning this short movie I've made. Parts 1 and 2 have brought me a lot of joy to make, and actually, a big reason why I publish these videos is to share with my family back home. You know, because they are back in the UK. They're 17. Is it 17? No, it can't be 17,000 K because you're 17,000 K away.
Think so.
They must be about 10,000 K away. But you know, they're really far away, and it's quite fun to share these videos I make and sort of inform them.
It could be which direction you go around the globe to get to us.
Yeah, I guess so.
But I do want to ask you on that though. When did you have the vision? Because I'm also doing this kinds of stuff. The script, I'm guessing, came at the end. When did you kind of know what this was gonna look like, or did you not know as you're putting it together? Did you have an overall vision for this at some point, or you just had a
Yeah,
collection of things that you pieced?
absolutely. It was all shot, especially waiting. Part 1, it was shot in 10 minutes, you know, and the script was something that had been bouncing around in my head for an hour or two. There's actually a fantastic YouTuber, and to be honest, to call him a YouTuber is probably a bit of a misnomer, because this guy really is, well, let me just say, he calls himself the spirited man, but Van Neistat on YouTube is, I think he's an absolute genius. And again, I do hope in many ways that I've, without copying Van's format of storytelling, I do hope at least I can compliment him and there's a reference there. But Van's work and his quite dramatic style of narration, almost Werner Herzog-esque, was really in my head that day as I looked out at the horizon, and there was nothing happening this day, Ben. It was so especially quiet. Usually you can hear birds. We have galahs here. They're beautiful birds, and they chirp. And often with the wind, you can hear trucks from the nearby expressway. But on this day, there was nothing. And it just seemed like someone had pressed the mute layer on my Premiere Pro channel. I had the visuals, but I didn't have the audio. And it's funny, man, because as a, you know, I guess filmmaker, to call myself now, my first thought in that moment was like, now's a great time for audio because there's no wind. And my phone, the audio is not great, but it definitely can't handle wind. And when I saw that opportunity for no wind, I thought, let me just record this audio now, and then the video is going to happen, you know. So it was really a process of speaking into my phone whilst recording and then going it in the shot. And yeah, that's pretty much the method. But you know, this is a low budget operation. You know, we haven't got onto my channel yet, but it's, you know, I try and keep it as raw and stripped back as I can.
And do you really have to sweep, or is that like a humor element? Because you're sweeping It looks like you're just sweeping dirt around.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I'm not sure if you'll see the calluses, but just along my hand here, I've got blisters from the 3 months of sweeping, and I do actually have gloves that I'm given quite regularly to prevent this, but the gloves have worn out on these thumb bits. Don't know what you call that, but I've worn through about 5 pairs of gloves because of this broom. And it's funny because the sweeping is really a byproduct of the job. There's so much other stuff, also quite menial to do, but yeah, there's a lot of sweeping.
So since we're on the topic, so this is your job to be able to live in Australia, right? To, to get your work permit, or I don't know what the right
Yeah,
term is. Let's just talk about your transition from the UK. I mean, what a different environment you're living in. Like on your recent video that you just posted about UK to Australia, you talk about the minimum wage, and and people not locking their vehicles, which was kind of surprising to you, which I think might be about. I live in a small town, probably similar size to what you live in now, and I would say most people don't lock their vehicles or houses too. I think that might be a product of size and population, maybe, but you've gone from city living to city living and a cooler climate to a much warmer, drier, different world. I'm very interested in the logistics of that, and then like what it takes.
yeah, yeah. It's a transition's a great word, honestly, because the transition has been it's been purely spontaneous. It's been organic. I've had the pleasure of doing this entire transition with my partner Courtney, who is actually Australian. She's got dual nationality between the United Kingdom and Australia. So I've joked to some of my friends that I've had the best tour guide money can buy. Um, but in many ways, I think that if I compare the city life, I'm from the southeast of England, only about 40 kilometers from London. Um, and having sort of grown up in a bustling environment, where on the topic of locking things, I've always had to lock everything I've ever owned, and that's obviously within my house. Like I'm not talking about my bedroom or my belongings, but it's strange to come to an environment now where past all of those locking, I guess, novelties, there is this communal sense of familiarity. People know me as the guy that drives the blue car because there's kind of only one guy that drives a blue car around town, and that to me is just mind blowing. That is I guess Truman Show-esque. Hey Truman, and then he knows everyone's name as he goes through town. Um, and I guess growing up in not the city per se, but definitely with more people around. Um, I like the anonymity of more people. I really do. And I guess I also like bizarrely, I guess, this sense of um, unfamiliarity. I do like that. I think there's absolutely an essence of being on the road that almost pleases my soul more than this idea. I mean, we've been here 3 months to do this job. We've been in this small town, 1,500 people, as I've said in the video, and it's a really quite remote place. It's very far away from everything, to be honest. And 3 months has felt like enough for me here. It's been fantastic. Don't get me wrong. We've had everything we've needed, and I've managed to do this job, and I'm on week 12 of a marathon training plan now. Everything's going great, but I'm ready to move on to the next place. I'm kind of willing to give up the comfort that we have here and the familiarity, and I know where everything is in the supermarket. Straight away I can go in and out, and that kind of annoys me in a way. I don't know why, but there does seem this primal urge to, I guess I just want to go over the horizon. I want to have that mirage for myself to mistake what I think is a gas station when I'm running out of gas. or, you know, a disused barn. All of those kind of things excite me, you know.
Are you going to be moving again soon? Like,
Yeah, so we're saying that we're actually leaving 3 weeks today. So we're going to be heading into the city. Adelaide is actually our next stop. And that will be our base for the next year or so.
most people I know don't enjoy moving. What was it like? What was it like moving, like logistically, just moving from across the globe, moving your stuff, and what was that like?
So I guess to paint a bit of a picture here, I left home when I was 18. I moved to London to study photography. Um, I lived in my first place for I think a year. I think a year while I was studying, and that's probably the longest I've ever lived in any one place apart from home. I've always moved, and I guess to my dad's annoyance because he's always helped me. I like moving, man. I like seeing different places, living in different parts of London. And when it came to moving to Australia, I guess it was just a bit like, I guess it can sound quite macabre saying it like this, but I called my dad one day and I just said, oh, you know, we're going to move to Australia and can you drive us to the airport? You know, obviously there was about a month's notice here. It wasn't just like on the day. And my dad, of course, was really happy to do that. But I could also sense there that, you know, those times that it helped me move, you know, maybe that wasn't going to happen for a little while. But luckily, we've since found Courtney's parents here who can help us move every year. So that's very helpful. But yeah, honestly, coming to Australia was a smooth transition. Seriously, um, it was something that I was definitely aware of would be emotional, it would be difficult, it would be, I guess, in a sense, I'd be out of my depth. And I was ready for all those things. But um, I was amazed to travel that far, to be on a plane for 36 hours, two planes, to get to Australia and to feel at home from day one. And to, you know, I ran my first marathon here about 5 weeks into living here. And you know, man, it was such a normal experience, which is bizarre. It's so strange.
Let's branch into your you're growing up in England, England, UK. I don't know. The pub life, you know, in leading into your sobriety, and then into running. I mean, can you talk me through kind of what? I mean, I've watched your video, so I have an idea, but just for anybody that doesn't kind of know, you know, what I think pub life is for me was when I watched your video is what kind of stood out is, you know, I don't know if it's at least in the areas I've lived here, there isn't that kind of meet at the pub kind of thing, which I think I've seen in movies. And then when I heard you say that, I'm like, oh, that seems like it's kind of a thing over there. And I could see how that could develop into a problem. Can you talk through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, pubs, especially British pubs, are fantastic places. Unfortunately, they're not so good if you're not drinking. But, you know, us British definitely have you know, it's of course subjective, but definitely have an association with drinking. And I think the drinking culture, um, you know, to be subjective and to, I guess, talk about my experience is difficult here. But um, you know, for me, it's the obvious. It was the obvious choice. You know, I would just say it's the obvious drug, and um, I guess it's for a lot of people. Um, you know, interestingly, comparing it to Australia, Australia is quite an expensive place to drink, and because I guess the weather's so much nicer here, it doesn't seem to have that same thing, that same appeal to go to the pub. But you know, I can only say in my experience that, you know, unfortunately for me, I think that um, you know, growing up with trauma in my life, and I think not really ever finding my feet, I think that alcohol was definitely it was never an option, you know, and I know it will never be an option, but it definitely felt like that was the route that I wanted to go down to solve my problems, you know, albeit temporarily.
You talked about the solution ended up being the problem.
Absolutely.
You want to explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is I guess for every addict, for everyone that suffers from alcoholism, I think there's a shared experience here. And obviously that term alcoholic is incredibly subjective. Again, that there's no one definition for that, but I think that there's a big difference between someone that can engage in a activity or a substance and walk away from that substance or activity under their own accord. And I know for myself that and to preface this, I started drinking when I was very young. And unfortunately, my mum has struggled with alcohol for most of her life. And, I'd been intoxicated, I'd been drunk probably by the age of 11. So it was pretty clear to me that alcohol changes things. It can impose a state of being that is other, that is, it's numb. And I guess, having grown up with these experiences and for lack of a better term, getting rid of those experiences temporarily, alcohol just seems to be like this fantastic learned behavior, this ritualistic endeavor that sort of put everything away, and I think, unfortunately for me, this was something that I was really good at. I always was able to get up and function. I would say that at the age of 23, when I decided to is probably the wrong way to put it. I would say that the most successful time that I quit, when I was 23 years old, I think that was the time when I realized that the fuel of the fire, in many respects, was the alcohol. But what was the fire in the first place? Those logs, and what was catching those embers in the first place? That was when I really, I guess, realized the power of running. To be honest, it seems sort of cliche that I bring up running in that way, but I guess it definitely it made me, I guess, reflect on the self-awareness that I'd picked up in all of those times that I tried to quit drinking, and I really realized, oh man, I'm drinking cough syrup for a cut on my foot. And that cough syrup's great, man. That cough syrup's numbing my throat, it's numbing my head. I'm going to sleep easily. But that cut on my foot, man, it's getting worse and worse. And it seemed that obvious overnight, Ben. It really did. And I quit cigarettes the same day. I smoked cigarettes for 10 years. And I had many unsuccessful attempts at, cutting those. And it was a pretty strange thing, I guess, where let's say that fire, instead of being lit for, it was lit for a long time, man. It seemed quick and sort of obvious that I should just kick sand over the whole lot, and not just kick the sand, just run in that direction. And that's kind of where I've been since.
Literally run in that direction. Would you? What would you? I just want to ask you, if somebody else was in a situation like yours, or you somehow you kicked it, what would you recommend to them?
The thing that I keep coming back to, it's an idea that it floats around my head all day, Ben, and I read it in different books. And I read it today. I read it today in a way that I found beautifully cohesive and just unapologetically obvious. And that was this idea of being a victim, this idea of taking it personally, this idea of drinking or smoking or sniffing something as a result of something that you've done in the past, something that's happened to you, something that someone else is doing right now that's bugging you and it's making you want to do that thing. Just think about what it is that makes you take that personally. because we're all victims of all sorts of things. But, you know, ultimately, in my case, I experienced trauma as a child. Unfortunately for me, that was sexual abuse, and that was something that I struggled with for a long, long time. And when I realised it, funny enough, it was actually during lockdown that I guess the drinking, the time I had on my own, I think it came to a head, and it became obvious. I guess my first glimpse that the sand could be kicked over the fire. It came to me when I realised, like, I am carrying the guilt of someone else's actions. I have shame for something I shouldn't have shame for, and I have the opportunity here to, of course, be the victim. I'll always be a victim, and I'm a survivor, and I'm very proud of that. But pride, that's the key word here, is that I am proud of everything. I've befriended my alcoholism, my experience with sexual assault. I had to, Ben. I had to forgive that person, and I had to forgive myself for what I've done to my body, for putting myself in that situation. I think that, to go back to your question, forgiveness, first of all, are you the victim? And if you are, find pride in being a victim. Honestly, because all day, every day, we can find things to feel victimized by, to take things personally. If I walk out in the street now and someone shot me, which is very unlikely in this beautiful small town I'm living in, but if someone did that, I would be a fool to take that personally. You know, what reason would they have? Even if it was someone that I knew, it's more of their problem than it is mine. And I think, you know, of course, there's a grain of salt to be taken with that. But anyone struggling with substance, or they're struggling, as I did, with assault or abuse, I really do just think there's an essence of acceptance, but there's an acceptance of pride. And I think that pride is number one. I really do.
You mentioned in your, that's amazing stuff, by the way, and congratulations. And you've taken on this path of running, which I thought I found interesting. At the end of one of your videos, you said, I wrote down here, anxious after drinking, you figured out that you felt anxious and depressed, right? And the first thought that came to me is that after running is exactly the opposite of that. It takes down my anxiety. It takes down any depression. I'm left feeling, and I've said this ad nauseum in a lot of my videos, like when I have the runs that I really don't want to go out, the runs that I'm really like, not today, and then I push through that, and I get out the door and have a run. Those are always the most rewarding runs afterwards. I feel proud of myself. I feel so, this, let's talk about how running played a part into your transition out of and into sobriety.
Absolutely. And then this is where the central governor, for me, I think, is most potent. You know, the central governor, in layman's terms, is this voice that we have in our head that it's a warning mechanism. It tells us when we walk into a room full of people, here's a moment to be anxious. There's people around you. You know, maybe we don't have to do this today. Maybe we're better suited to not go into this situation. When we're running, the central governor, you know, it can give us cramps, or it can give us this feeling that we're overheating, or it could just give us this eternal dread that I know anyone that's ever trained for any race will have at some point during their training, that I'm not good enough for this and I shouldn't be doing this. And the central governor, in many respects, is the ego. And I think, you know, to answer your question simply, Ben, I think there's a sense here where the voice in my head for so long that medicated and encouraged me to medicate myself with alcohol, that brought on those, you know, the sleepless nights and the depression, the anxiety, unhappiness, it's a rubbish word to use, unhappiness, but there was a grief that was born out of these cans that I pick up, and to simply now buy the same version, but it says 0 alcohol at the bottom. It just seems like a cruel game that's all I needed to do. But to put it quite simply, my ego didn't know what life was like without a few fermented or distilled raw materials every day. I didn't know how to cope, and it was just that numbing sensation that my ego latched onto. And I honestly believe this, and I've got no training in any scientific or psychological background, but I believe that the same voice that used to say to me, Scott, you are guilty for your sexual abuse. You asked for that to happen. That's something that I believed for a long time. That same voice is the same voice that told me I was a piece of shit for drinking, that also encouraged me to go and drink. I think that's the same voice that comes into my head at 38k in a marathon and gets me to slow down. So for me, come on, man. I've been listening to you for 2 years at this point. I'm 18 months sober in a few days. And, I've been in this toxic relationship for far too long, man. And I guess to some respect, we all are. We all have this inner voice, and we all speak to it, and we all communicate. At least I hope you do. At least I hope that is a two-way conversation for all of us. It should be. We should have that awareness to understand that this inner voice hasn't always got our best intentions. But I really do think that is where self-awareness comes from. I think that is meditation. Why do we meditate? We meditate to be one-on-one with that guy, so I can see a mirror image of Scott right there, and to be up against that. And for me, that is I guess there's a cue now. Like, I always struggled with cigarettes. I always struggled to quit cigarettes. This time around, for some reason, it was easy. And I almost sometimes imagine or expect my mind, when I walk past someone smoking, I imagine my mind to be like, I'll go and just ask for one. But of course it doesn't, because not only have I cut the cigs, but I'm also running now. I'm marathon training. So that thought is so far away. But I almost wouldn't put it past him in there to one day be like, go on, have one.
Were you always a runner? You know what I mean? How did running before? Because you jumped into marathons. Your first one was 4 hours, and then you almost cut an hour. You pretty quickly cut an hour off that, which I would say doesn't happen to most normal runners. Were you a runner? I'm guessing before all of this, or am I wrong?
Well, I played soccer growing up, only ever for fun. And
you called it soccer. I appreciate that.
No, well, it's it pained me to say that. I did actually say that with my fingers crossed. But being in a country where football is, they kick this strange egg-looking thing. I have to say soccer everywhere now. It's quite annoying. Sorry, Dad, if you're watching, you'll be really offended by that. But my dad was actually a far better footballer and a better runner than I ever was as a teen. And I really enjoyed athletics at school, to be honest, as I enjoyed basketball and softball and rugby. I enjoyed all the sports, not because I was any good at them, but because it meant that I didn't have to go to class that day. And I usually hadn't done the homework, so I just went to go and play a sport that I was rubbish at. Although one day, the athletics event, it wasn't anything special. It was just, schools against each other. I ran a 400 meters in 60 seconds flat, which I had no idea at the time was anything special, but I was probably about 14 years old. And I went home and I told my dad, and my dad said, "Oh, that was my time. I never broke 60 seconds, but you've done the same as me." And then I was kind of like, wow, I could beat my dad at something. My dad that played quite high level soccer also was, quite athletic in his time. I could beat my dad. And unfortunately, this was sort of the age where drinking had definitely become more common and cigarettes definitely were more accessible to me. I was blessed with quite a nice amount of facial hair and just looked a little bit older than my friends at that age. So I was able to buy alcohol and cigarettes quite easily. And I had also at this point started smoking weed. So any kind of athletic prowess I had was quickly going, and any kind of motivation to go to these sporting things also went out the window. So really, I didn't run again until actually during lockdown, which is quite funny because we're probably talking about 7 years has gone by at this point, and I hadn't been active at all. My first run that I wanted to go out and do was to run a 5K in under 20 minutes, which I had no idea just how fast that was. And I'd narrowly missed that by not sure how long. This wasn't tracked on Strava or anything. This was a case of looking at my phone, mapping it out online, and then going to run this route. And I'm pretty sure I did this a few times over a few months and eventually got under 20 minutes for the 5K. And you know what I did next, Ben? I didn't run again for like 18 months. It's so annoying. It's really frustrating to look back now. And of course I wouldn't change a thing, but to be 25 now and I had my last drink and cigarette 18 months ago. Really, that's when my running journey started. That's how I identify as a runner, as a fairly new runner. But really, I've got running roots going way back, and that's there's a little bit of me that's obviously sad that if I was running 60 seconds before 100 at 14, what could I have done at 18? But in the same regard, I've heard fantastic runners. Jake Smith from the UK spoke of this recently in a podcast where he said that he wouldn't recommend people get into running too seriously too young, because you ruin it for yourself. You get to 25 and you're not bothered anymore. And I like Jake's an exceptional athlete. He's representing GB and running for NN, and he's 22 or 23 years old. Exceptional athlete. But I think about myself at 22, and I worked in a coffee shop and I rode around on my skateboard, and they were honestly some of the best days of my life. And I'm not sure that I would want to be, running around a track, to be honest, at that age.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't. If I told myself I'd be a distance runner, let alone an ultra runner, at in my 40s, going into my 50s, like there's no way my younger self would have believed that.
And in that regard, Ben, it may be that you would never have become that ultra marathoner had you followed a conventional athletic path in your youth. And it may be that I'll get this marathon / endurance running bug out of my system in a year's time, and that be it. I won't be running at your age, which I very highly doubt, but that could be the case.
There's a point which I would think at the level that you're running at, right? That there's a point where you hit an age where it starts to decline. I mean, no matter what athletic thing you're doing, and when you're not putting up personal bests anymore, and you're starting to feel that, I could see that as being a point where, well, now why am I doing this? Because I've been chasing personal best for so long. For me, at least in ultra running, I keep putting up, like I said, I'm almost 50. Well, I'm 47, almost 48. And I keep doing things that I think are literally impossible. So that's like a driver for me, and probably how I got into ultra running. But running any kind of distance when I was younger, I mean, anything, once a year we do a mile run, like with football, American football. We do a mile run in practice. At the end of practice, we do a mile run, and that was the longest I'd ever run, and it would kill me. I would dread that. So, why you run? You talk about what were the for those who should who can and those who can't. Talk me through that.
Oh, well, this is this is the crux of it all, Ben. This is what I believe, man, and it's compassion, it's gratitude. I think it's self-awareness. I think that's what it comes down to. And ask yourself why you do anything, and I hope for us all that we can find at least one of those three things there. But I said in the video that I I've got many reasons to run, and I was deeply, deeply shocked. Especially in 2020 at the injustice that was happening all over the world, but particularly in the United States. Ahmaud Arbery's death whilst running, his brutal murder, was something that at the time I was running, this was in one of those brief periods where I was doing my 5Ks, and I felt deeply, deeply attacked and saddened by this prospect that an innocent man running would be gunned down. And it's a weird thing, it's a weird thing crying while running. And I think there's something primarily quite pleasing about it. I've done it in all of my marathons, and something that happens in training a lot. And I think that was the first time I ever cried during a run. It was actually a friend of mine had asked me to post on Strava after that run to use the hashtag run for Ahmaud Arbery. And as I came to the end of the run, I thought about putting that on my Strava, and it just brought me to so many tears, man. It really did. And I spoke in that video about how, being a man with white skin, it's unlikely that I'll ever be gunned down really anywhere in the world based on prejudice. And I'll never understand what it's like to have that right taken away from me to go for a run based on the color of my skin. And that I don't think means that I shouldn't talk about it. And it's not something that ever leaves my head, quite honestly. I think of so many people in the world that live in fear, particularly women. Back where I'm from in London, the attacks on female runners it's awful. It's a number that keeps growing, and I don't know why, but it pains me. I find it incredibly sad. And I think the reason I mention this is because in these awful stories, I feel compassion, of course. I feel empathy. I feel self-awareness, of course, because how bloody lucky am I? There's the gratitude, and you mentioned there about chasing the PBs. Yeah, it's great. Don't get me wrong. Like, it is a fantastic prospect to be working towards something, to work towards a goal, to achieve that goal. It's always great, but you can't forget the basic nature of being able to go out and do this activity that on any given day you'll have a certain runner's high. It'll always be there, maybe some days more than others, but you can go out and do that, you're in a pretty damn good place, and I had the great pleasure of working in a university in London as a disability support worker, and I worked with an amazing student who never had the right to run, to experience what I have. She is 21 now, I believe, and she's never known what it is like to go to a park run or to train or to press the start button on a Garmin watch. Something so novel as that. I'm sure she would give anything to experience that. And it doesn't stop her from engaging in all my videos or giving to the fundraisers for my marathon places during the charity events. And that to me is such a reason to go out and do it, even on the days, and especially on the days I don't feel like it.
I'm constantly, the thought comes into my head how lucky I am to do this, and I think your words actually kind of illuminate that even more for me. But like I'll have the feeling like this is literally what my body was designed to do. Like that thought comes into my head, and especially when and that's usually as I'm getting into my best groove and really feeling it. I'm not somebody that usually loves running. It's a difficult journey for me, which I think you seem to love it a lot more than me, and I'm jealous of that. Um, it's more of a mental struggle, I think, possibly for me. But I say that knowing that that running is such a mental challenge. But I definitely get that feeling that like this is what our bodies are designed to do. We're our advantage over the animal world, besides our brain, is that we can run longer distances because we sweat, because and we're designed for this.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt there. And I know that like veganism, something you're probably quite interested in here, Ben, and it's something that I'm constantly aware of, is that as humans, like so many things are subjective. You know, for me, I choose a plant-based life because that makes me feel connected to the earth. You know, I've friends where I work that love fishing every weekend. That makes them feel connected. And you know, either way, it's cool. And I think there's a sense that without a doubt, we are made to run. We are made to move, and we're made to explore, I think, to see different horizons. And oh man, what an amazing thing that is. You know, the arbitrary distance, you know, the marathon, 42 Ks or 26.2 miles. It's a long bloody way, and I think that's what makes it special. You know, it's always a pain in the ass. I'm sure even for Elliot, you know, it's very quick for him, but you know, he's done this a fair amount of times. I'm sure he steps up to the line, and he must be aware that this is going to be a spiritual experience in some sense because it's so far. But I think that for us as humans is that nervous energy before the hunt, or that nervous energy before we run away from the predator, because of course the predator's out there to get us. We should be nervous, and I think that's what we're tapping into when we go out and do these feats, you know.
So you're running. You've started to put up some pretty fast times here. How did you? So you went from 5Ks. How'd you make the jump to like let's do marathons? Because it, like you said, you haven't been doing this that long, so you made a big jump there. What was that jump like?
Oh, it was terrifying, honestly. I only did this because of the competition with my dad, quite honestly. So my dad's favorite distance to run is the half marathon. He's 58 years old, and um, I believe he's got like a half PB that he set like 2 years ago of like 1:45. Like he's rapid for his age. And dad, when I was quite young, used to run like 18 or 19 miles on like a Sunday. And that would blow my mind. Like that was ridiculous. The furthest I ever got during school was actually a 10K. And that like was so hard. I wasn't fit, you know, or fit enough to do that when I did it. And it scarred me, you know, it really did. And um, it's funny, Ben, because I got a baseline speed through the 5K work that I did. I got down to an 18.5, I think, for the 5K. Really, that 5K was still the furthest I'd ever run. And then I wanted to go for the 10K. So my 10K races early on, at least the first one, I ran the first 5K at pretty much my 5K pace, and then held on for dear life until 10K came around, which was an awful race tactic, and I wouldn't suggest that to anyone. But once the 10K suddenly was like 38 minutes long, I think was my first sort of big PB in the 10K. Once I could run 6 miles in 38 minutes, then it was sort of, oh, well, a half marathon, maybe I could get around 90 minutes. And then again, that speed that I had, well, I was sort of able to start off like stupidly quick in retrospect, but I was able to get the first sort of half done quite quickly. So then the latter half wouldn't be too bad. And you know, this really brings me on to you know, the Brighton Marathon, and this was something that I went into. This was my first official marathon, and I really just saw an advert and thought, oh, it's in 10 weeks' time, I'll do it. 10 weeks seems like a long enough time to train for a marathon. So I got myself a place, and it was actually a charity place that I'd chosen, and it was for a British charity called NSPCC, and they do amazing work working with children, and it's of course very close to my heart. Children that suffered abuse, children that are currently in abusive houses, and giving these children the help necessary. Very, very dear to my heart. And I signed up that day, and I had a quick look around for marathon training plans, and I realised, shit, I don't have 7 weeks to train for this. I've got 5 weeks and then a 2-week taper. So like, I'm not in a good place to train for this at all, or to run it for that matter. So I decided to go in at the deep end pretty much. And my first long run was like a 20 miler, which for those of you that work in Ks, it's like 32, I think. And it was just hell. It was so hard, man. Like, I had no idea of like zones. So like for this kind of run, you want to be in zone 2, but I was definitely, going out solid, like zone 4, grey zone effort, like almost anaerobic. And I had no fuel. I didn't know what I needed in terms of carbohydrates. Hydration to me back then still meant water. There was no idea of salts, sodium intake, magnesium, and I had no idea of any of these things. So how I ran Brighton and finished it, I don't know. How I almost broke 3 hours in that marathon, I have no idea. But I will tell you that that training that I did for that marathon did absolutely nothing, because I had no idea what I was doing. And it was a plan that I completely wrote on a piece of paper on day 1 and just decided, I'm going to stick to this. There's going to be no amendments. I'm not going to take days off when I need them. And ultimately, that's actually what got me injured for 2 or 3 months after the Brighton Marathon, which, was purely a lack of self-awareness, and probably knowing that I needed to get a coach on board at that point. I think I would recommend anyone, if you are thinking, I've got this marathon coming up, I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to finish it in good shape with the plan that I have. I think it's really worthwhile just to consult a coach. It's going to be a bit of money, but if you invested into this, I would really recommend just, seeking some help for sure.
So I've never had a coach. What do you think the biggest benefit is? Is it, I mean, I think there's probably some accountability, having somebody there checking and stuff, and laying out a plan but what would you say the biggest benefit of a coach is?
I should probably lay that last statement with the caveat that I would recommend getting a coach on board if you've got a time limit. So in my case, I had 5 weeks, and like there was no doubt that I was going to do this marathon. I wasn't backing out. And for the sake of I guess £100, what's that in dollars, like maybe $150, to sit down with someone for a couple of hours and to say, okay, this is what's happening. Like, even getting a gait analysis, they would have told me, okay, you're running at 160 steps per minute. Like, that's way too little. You need to up your cadence. Doing that alone would have saved me an injury. I can put my entire injury down to that. I ran my first marathon with an average cadence like 162, and I was running like, I think 6:35, 6:40 for a mile. Like, it's ridiculous. I was like hurdling down the street, and it's that kind of stuff. Like, if you've got like 3 months to train for a marathon, like suddenly that's 10 weeks. You can probably get halfway through and start feeling like, okay, something's not right, I need to make an amendment. In that case, I won't say a coach is a bad idea, but I will say that you're probably going to be a bit more self-sufficient if you've got longer time, and you get that, Strava chart a bit more of a diagonal, whereas mine was straight up, dude. It's like first week 50 miles, And like, I had no idea of like builds or blocks. I really didn't. This approach that I'm taking now in my marathon training is, prescribed by my coach, and it's far more obvious to me now, like, okay, this is what we're doing. But there's rest days, and that to me is like, still, oh my god, I'm taking a full day off running. Like, that seems crazy. But I think in that regard, I will say that coaches will save you time. I think there's no way around it. If you've got the luxury of the cash to put into coaching, they inevitably will save you time. But in that same vein, I self-coached my way to a sub-3 marathon, and I did that really happily. To be honest, it wasn't the most glamorous day, glamorous marathon, but I did it. And for you, Ben, you've made great triumphs without a coach, so I would say keep on going, being self-directed.
And you squeezed under that 3-hour marathon by the smallest of margins. but before we get to that, I want to go back to your first marathon. So like, I look back at my very first marathon, which 18 20 miles in, the wheels fell off. But I'm so proud that I found a way to push through that discomfort. That, like, to me, looking back, that's one of the moments I'm proudest of, even though the time is nothing that I'm proud of. Like, it's almost embarrassing, but I found a way through discomfort that I'd never experienced before, and I'm pretty proud of that. I know you had it was a pretty rough first marathon, because obviously you went out way fast. What was the end of that marathon like? And talk a little bit about how emotional running can be. I mean, you've touched on it already, but
yeah. So to really preface this, the only way I can, I set up this charity fundraiser, and I had an amazing amount of support. I think I raised about £400 or £500, and it was way more than I needed to raise for my place. But my goal was a sub 250 marathon for my first marathon, which, like, that's essentially what I'm aiming for now. And I have to say, a year on from signing myself up for that first marathon, it's a ridiculous thing. It's ridiculous that I'm even trying to do it now, to be honest. It's such a hard thing to pull off. And, it's 6:25 average mile pace for 26.2 miles, or 4 minute per K for 42. It's so fast. And I went into this marathon truly believing that I had that pace. And I executed the plan, not perfectly, but pretty much bang on for the first 15K. And out of my 3 marathons that I've run, my 3 official marathons, I've got them in a spreadsheet, so I can actually see every 5K what I've gone through in. And that's still my fastest 15K split by a long shot, which, like, looking back, is hilarious, because I had no idea just how naive I was being going from 15K. Like, chatting to people around me, telling how good I feel. People are taking on gels, and I'm like, oh, I haven't had my first one yet. I'll have that at half. It's ridiculous. And but gels I hadn't practiced with either, and a huge mistake. I wouldn't recommend that to anyone. But I got to halfway, and it was a beautiful moment. My sister and Courtney had surprised me by bringing some of her friends, and I was just elated with this energy. And I had this just like turbocharger boost moment where my legs took off, and I put in like a 6:15 mile. It was stupid at like halfway, way above marathon pace, or target marathon pace. And it's hilarious because on that same stretch of road that went for about 2 or 3 miles, I just absolutely felt the wheels fall off. And it didn't happen quickly, like, they fell off slowly. And I was watching out for people ahead of me, the back of their heads. I was trying to reel them in, and they were getting further away, and I was trying harder and harder to catch up. And, to look at my watch and to only see at this point like 25 kilometers which I think is like 15 miles. Like, I'm so far from the end. Like, what am I doing? Like, this is so bad. And I had like one gel left, and I'd taken on like no water during this whole thing. It was just like, am I even going to finish this? And on my watch, I hadn't set it up in any specific way, as I recommend everyone should, to at least have some sort of lap pace, just so they can keep a track of like how fast they're moving. Also, write down on your arms your splits so you can go against distance boards, because GPS will go out inevitably. And I was looking at my average pace for the entire run. So that's the only metric I was going by, that and distance. And I wanted to keep that average pace. At this point, I decided 3 hours was on the cards. And I knew that was a 4:15 kilometer, or that would be like a 6:44 mile, I think. So that's the metric I had in mind. And at this point, Ben, my average pace was like 4:04 kilometer. It was like pretty much like a 2:52 marathon. And I still had 17K to go. And my goal was to just not let that time drop any further than a 4:15 or 4:16, so I could get that sub 3. And of course, that is just such an awful way to look at things. That is just like the most pessimistic way to run a marathon. Like, I don't know what I was thinking, but it's like almost in my head saying like, okay, I'm going to drink loads of water at the beginning, and then I'm going to just avoid all the water throughout the whole course and just see what happens. Like, it was stupid, but that's what I did. And as I got to, I mean, distance in this marathon was a complete blur, because it was such a nightmare and just so awful. But it was around like quite late on, to be honest, maybe 23 or 24 miles in, that I realized that I was going to finish it. And I just had this thought that, unfortunately, my dad couldn't be there on the day, but I had this thought of telling my dad the story of what had happened on this marathon. And that just brought me to absolute tears. And I think that was a really beautiful moment, because it was one of those first moments I've had physically where that central governor has just said, forget it. You're on your own here. I'm not going to help you out anymore. And you know that feeling, Ben, when you hit the wall and then you're just like, no, don't care. I'm going to go through that wall. It never happens quickly. You never hit the wall and get over it in 100 meters. It's usually like a K, 2K, can be 10K, as it was on that day for me. But once I got through, man, that last 2 miles was just, it was like I'd started again. I cried and I just got going. And it was an amazing thing, because as soon as I had cried, I'd just become overwhelmed with emotion. About 2 minutes later, randomly spectating was one of my good friends from London. He just happened to come down to Brighton to watch it, and I saw him. Out of the thousands there that day, he was there, and he saw me. Come on, Scott, come on. I think we both took each other by surprise. And then about 5 minutes later, I saw another friend that same situation. I didn't realize I was going to see him, and it was just such a beautiful experience. What I didn't know, and the marathon hurt so much at the end, I didn't know that I'd actually injured myself during the marathon, and it was the injury that would last for the next 3 months. So of course it hurt. I've never finished a marathon in so much pain. But having picked up a chronic injury during a race, I don't think I'll ever feel that much pain in a race ever again, to be honest.
Well, since you brought it up, let's talk about injuries, because I'm just coming off one, just on the backside of it. Hopefully, I want to knock on wood here. It's an interesting thing that I feel like I'm finally starting to get better at it, where I get a little injury or a bigger injury, and then I just go into a funk. Like, I eat like crap. I just let everything fall apart, and I've gotten a little bit better at kind of realizing that this is a temporary thing, and do what you can, trying to get through it. But you talked about you stopped filming as much. You stopped. It seemed to me like you kind of got yourself into a funk. How do you deal with injuries and getting through them?
It's definitely a difficult one, and it's not something to be taken lightly. So I very much congratulate you, Ben, for getting out the woods with yours. And I hope that if you're not there 100%, I'm sure it's only a matter of time. But with these things, man, I think it's so much of a mental game. I think that if you've given yourself the patience to heal, which running is a healing mechanism, it has been for me. But I think if your body is asking for rest, if you can 100% say, you know what, you can have it. I'm going to treat you well. I'm going to not let that anxiety, that cortisol that's building up because I haven't made a video this week, that's doing no good for the injury. Absolutely not. It's not doing any good for anything. The same way as, you mentioned food there. Food is vital in recovery, and it's, that and sleep, really, that's all we need to be, to be improving or at least sustaining as runners. And I think these things are so important. But I think, when it comes to injury, I think that is a point of reflection. And I have to admit, on this question, it almost sounded like you were seeing if I had any hot tips. But I think it reminds me just how fearful I am of getting injured now and how ill prepared I would be. To be honest, I've run. I'm 12 weeks into training now, and it's been an amazing training block. But I've run this thing. A lot of mileage. I can't work it out the top of my head, but I've loved running. I really have, and it's been more mileage than I've ever put into any training block in my life. Every week that I've trained, pretty much since November, I've run a bigger week than my biggest ever week. It's been amazing, and to not have running in my life suddenly, I think, be a massive detriment to me. And actually, it's something that I would struggle with mentally. But this is, as all things with life, I think is an opportunity to learn. And I know that one person that would really find it difficult is my partner. I think Courtney would really notice the change in me. I think she would be really accommodating, and she would know that if I had a short fuse, that there's a reason for that. And I think if way back when we met 3 years ago, had it been that she had seen me on a grumpy day because I've been injured for 2 weeks, and we met at work, and had I not been in the best mood because I hadn't had my run that morning, or I had to cut my marathon training block short because I was injured or ill or fatigued, I don't think she'd like who I was, quite honestly. And I think we've got to be able to check in and realize, like, man, we're so lucky to be able to do this, and it happens to everyone. Like, look at I don't know if you follow triathlon, but Jan Frodeno, like, in my opinion, the best Ironman athlete of all time, or at least one of them. There's been some amazing female athletes over the year too, but Jan Frodeno has just had a career absolutely just dominated by injuries. Kenenisa Bekele, another one. He's run, he could arguably had a better athletic career than Kipchoge, but he's just had so many injuries. Like, if it happens to the best, it's going to happen to us as well. And I really think that the more we can learn from it, the more we can probably heal better in the future, and probably easily accept that inevitable day when we can't run anymore, because it's going to happen to all of us.
Yeah, but I see it. I've in this journey for me, I've been noticing the more I kind of push against my weaknesses, when I notice, the like when I'm injured, I get weak. I get mentally weak. I let myself get mentally weak. And the more I push against that feeling, the better off I usually am. And it's like, this is just the new part of this journey that I have to get through. And I flipped this past injury was kind of the first time I actually kind of did that, where I was like, this, do what you can, push as much as you can where you can. And I got through it mentally much better than I have before. So I was looking for any other nuggets, because injuries are, like you said, I'm terrified of them. I try my best to avoid them, but I mean, you're doing marathons. I mean, it's something your body, you're straining your body. I'm running just a ridiculous amount of miles trying to train for ultra marathons and even longer distances. And it's like, I'm at red quite often, like right on the line. And I am trying to push my limits. And if you're pushing the limits, if you're really pushing the limits, you're going to go past them at some point. So.
Yeah, absolutely. But for anyone that is injured, or that is listening to this, having come back from an injury, I can't stress enough just how much you can get from books. I'm definitely, I guess, guilty of this. I've worked as a teacher in my past, and I'd always push academics over anything. But I think that investing time into reading, especially about running, there's some fantastic running literature out there. While I was injured last year, I dived into Born to Run for the first time, an absolute must read for anyone. There's some fantastic books about running in Japan, running in Ethiopia. Running on Thin Air is a personal favorite of mine, about altitude training in Ethiopia. Just an absolute, just whirlwind of information. And funny enough, I read that when I was injured last year. There was some amazing information in there about running form, and that actually helped my rehabilitation from the injury. So I will say that, I'm running about 10 hours a week at the moment. You don't have to read for 10 hours a week, but just put some of that time into some strength work, into stretching, into reading. Of course, there's some amazing podcasts out there. I can think of a few, yourself included, Ben, but there's so much information out there to take on board that will help with the running. And, to be honest, after this marathon, I will say I've been incredibly lucky to get through this block so far. Touch wood, of course, but I can't wait to just have some time to sit down, to rest the legs and read. I'm honestly missing it at this point. But all of that time is valuable. If you're losing fitness, it's like not precious. Fitness comes back so quickly. It's amazing, and just be patient, because it will be back.
One thing I came to running through triathlon. I was a swimmer in school, and then I got into swimming, and then I started cycling a little bit. I'm like, oh, I could do triathlon. Then it's like, but there's this one part of running which I hate, And then I built up and did a couple Ironman, and then got the running bug, right? But the one thing I've noticed through that training is, unlike running, my past year was just straight mileage focused, and it definitely cost me some injuries, some injury problems. And when I was doing Ironman training, there's that constant cross training. You're switching disciplines. So this one thing I've kind of noticed, I'm like, oh, let's go back to swimming. I can still keep my endurance up, and I don't really need to use my legs, or get on the bike, and I can just, depending on what injury I have going on at the time, being able to cross train is definitely something big. What do you do? What do you do to stay injury free?
Oh, that's a great question. I think at the moment, I'm so pushed time-wise with work. I think that I will say that sleep is the number one. I can't stress enough that for me, I think I definitely feel a stress physically and mentally from not having much time. And, I think it'd be good to let the audience know just how hard it's been to squeeze this conversation in. So I do apologize, Ben, but you originally emailed me the first week of November, I believe. It was a long time ago, and we're recording this like mid-January. I've worked, in some weeks 70 hours. I've done 11 days in a row, and it's only now that work has calmed down. I still worked a 40-hour week, and I've still trained. It's going to be 85 miles after tomorrow's long run. I've still trained a lot, and during that time, I haven't had time to foam roll, to stretch, to use a massage gun. But every single day, I've got at least 8 hours of sleep, and it's not always easy. Some days I finish work, I run, I go to sleep. It's as simple as that. Of course, there's food in there, but sleeping early every night, quality sleep, sleep mask on, earplugs every night. I think that is the absolute best investment you can make. And like one of the cheapest things you can do is to just literally get an eye mask, because we worry about it on airplanes, and then all of a sudden we neglect just how important sleep is. I think all of the time. Matt Walker's Why We Sleep is one of my favorites, but I think above all else, I think nutrition is really key. And it sort of seems counterintuitive, because running's such a biomechanical thing. Like, I guess the answer from a lot of people might be like, oh, I use the New Balance Fresh Foam, or I use Nike Invincibles, and I take like 5 ice baths a week. I'm sure those things help, but I having a vegan diet, I know the importance of taking on extra B12. I take magnesium every morning. I take calcium, vitamin C, and all of those things I've tried and tested to see how I feel. And I'm not getting ill. I'm not feeling fatigued. I'm getting quality sleep. And this is obviously money that I invest into these vitamins, into these supplements. But, I'm this far into running literally 80 miles a week for the last 12 weeks, something that I've never done before. I've never gone over the marathon distance, but I'm able to do this high volume training and working a lot. All I'm doing is sleep, prioritizing sleep and getting these nutrients. And, for me, that's what's working for me. So it may not help other people, but, I'm not doing anything extra. And to be honest, I would be reluctant to share that information had it not been for the latest podcast with Christian Blumenfeld and Gustav Eden on the Rich Roll podcast, talking about their recovery. And for them, their answer was sleep. That was it. There's no massage guns, there's no foam rolling, there's no massages, but they could have anything they want. These two guys are the best in the world. All they want is sleep. They come back from their morning training, they sleep. Come back from the afternoon training, sleep. Incredible.
Wow. That's not the answer I expected, and you've just called me out on something I'm weak on.
Really?
Well, so I think you're absolutely right. I'm always trying to figure out, like, I don't want my running to take away from my time with my family. So I'm trying, so like, it's like, where can I fit this into my schedule? Where can I get these miles? And it usually I'm going to do it while they're sleeping. So then that ends up being, I'm chunking up my sleep time, and then I'm trying to stay up late or I want to stay up with them because I don't want to miss time with them. So that I am absolutely sacrificing and probably causing myself a detriment. And I try to make up with that with yoga and some other things, because my son's a physical therapist, and every time I get injured, I ask him what to do, and he's like, "Well, stretch this or stretch that." It's like, oh, maybe I should just stretch first. So that's the one thing I do. But yeah, I definitely need to add some more focus on sleep.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about vegan. How'd you come about that choice?
Well, I would say that I certainly didn't take it on board quickly. It was something that was in my family. My dad's partner, while I was growing up, was a vegan or vegetarian, and she was in my life since I was a very young kid. And of course, there's kind of like a humor between us when like, I don't know how long it's been since she's been in my life, but after all these years, she's kind of like, Yeah, like I guess I had a good influence on you, but um, in many regards, I think there was definitely seeds planted while I was growing up about, you don't necessarily have to, um, yeah, I guess to put it simply, eat everything in the supermarket. I think there's definitely a choice to be made here, and like the best thing on the menu isn't always the thing that costs the most. And I would say they're probably quite Western ideas of um, food, I guess, and um, maybe there's a egoic nature to it as well as hunter gatherers. Like we want the biggest that we can get, you know, and it's quite funny, growing up, my dad's partner, as I said, never really had this attitude, and quite often she'd be happy with the. I mean, we visited the States then. We had the pleasure of traveling up and down the East Coast, and quite often there wasn't much for her to eat, and I never understood what she was doing. And aside from the ethical concerns that we both have, and actually as a family, we've gone vegetarian, which is quite nice. So there's four of us now that are vegetarian, and myself vegan. And I think there's something that I've realised over time, and that is that it is doable, and it's not always easy. And I think that in a nut size piece is like that's almost part of the fun, is you have to work for it and you have to be inventive. And to be honest, man, like there's not that many quick, I guess vegan meals that aren't nutritious. Like you can't really get too far without throwing vegetables in. I mean, you can pretty much live on saturated fats like crisps. You guys call them chips, but like you're not going to get very far as a marathon runner. For me, like there's not too much deep fried stuff going on. So really, I'm left with like frying up veggies, frying up, I guess carbs, frying up potatoes, things like that. And I guess these things, in the grand scheme of things, are fairly nutritious without having too much of a. I'm careful not to use the word bad with food because I don't believe that any food is bad. It's fuel. But I guess that seeing food as fuel, I think definitely aligns with having a um, I guess concern for the environment, concern for the welfare of what we're engaging in. And I think veganism for me, um, I will say it's uh, an easy route to go down. And the reason I use that word easy is because there's not a sense of, um, like if you're a meat eater, for example, you might decide that you only want to eat grass-fed red meat, for example. Now that to me is like probably quite healthy. To be honest, I'm not sure. You're probably getting quite a lot of nutrients from that. But if you go to a restaurant and you say, "Oh, I want grass-fed red meat only," like that's quite a pain in the ass. Whereas if I go into a restaurant and say, "Have you got anything vegan?" and they say no, I'm like, "Okay, easy." That took 5 seconds. Yeah, whereas if they say yes, it's like, "Oh yeah, there's one thing to choose from. Brilliant, I'll have that." Like it's easy, and that to me is perfect. Like I love food. I wouldn't say that I'm a foodie, and to be honest, that kind of suits me. To be honest, it's that's just I guess where I'm at. And I guess ethically, I do feel a bit more of a connection with the environment. I think having considered these approaches, and over time, I quit meat, and then I quit fish, and then eggs, and then now I'm on a fully plant-based diet. And yeah, I mean that is where I feel good, and I'm not sure that I'd ever go back to eat any of those things. But it's definitely easy for me. I will say that.
It's easy in its challenge, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's something about there's definitely a connection, I think, of chasing comfort. We could go take I must take the easy route, but not in the way you mean it. Like just putting that the just filling your food, your mouth. When I'm at my worst, I'm just like, oh, that looks good. I'll have some of that. I'll have some of that. So you know, having that discipline, I think, is a better place for us humans to be. Having that challenge for me, it's more fasting. I and there's and trying to eat real foods. I haven't gone as far as you. Maybe I'll end up on a path like that someday. But just trying to. I could eat that donut. I could eat that, but I don't really need. There isn't, besides mouth pleasure. I don't need it. That's the only thing I'm after in that moment. I don't actually need that fuel at this moment. Yeah, it's an interesting path, and I commend you for doing it. And I personally, I know when I'm being disciplined. When I'm being disciplined, I feel my best. And then if you could stay disciplined long enough, then it's a habit, and then it's, as you said, easy.
Absolutely. But I should elaborate on not wanting to use the word bad for food, because there's a reason that your central governor in many ways wants you to eat that donut, Ben, and that's because that donut is full of essential fats, it's full of sugar that's going to keep you going. There's a nice amount of calories there to keep your internal thermoregulation going, and that's all your brain needs to do. It needs to keep you alive. So you're not wrong in wanting that. It's a great quick source of energy. Of course, it's probably going to wreak havoc on everything internally. You're probably going to raise your blood pressure, but your brain's not thinking about that. And I think that is that kind of computing. I think that we need to take in all aspects of our life, but especially I think food is really, really one of those places where we owe it to ourselves. We're going to do it anyway, and that is something that I think in a mindful, almost like monk-like state, if we're going to do this anyway, we might as well be present while we're doing it. And I can preach this all I like, and I try to mindfully eat as much as I can, but some days you just forget and it's gone before you noticed it. But I think all of those kind of practices, being at one with your food, and part of the reason that I love vegan food is that I enjoy the whole process. And I mentioned earlier that I have friends at work that like to fish for their dinner. They do enjoy the whole process. They talk about the whole catching process, the killing and skinning and all that. And I never liked any of that. I went fishing once and I hated it. And I never liked stuffing the turkey at Christmas. I hated it all. I hated the raw animal. And I don't condemn anyone that eats the finished products that doesn't enjoy the process. But I will say for myself that I really like the whole go into the shop and picking each vegetable. I try to avoid plastics. So I'm just choosing the one carrot that I think looks nice. That's how I like my shopping to be. It's a bit of a pain in the arse, and it's not that easy in that regard. I never buy a ready meal that goes in the microwave, but at least I'm at one with the process.
I do. I mean, a couple of years ago, my wife and I started a garden, and just there absolutely is a connection. When I eat a tomato out of the garden, there's a connection there that I don't get from a store-bought, tomato. There's yeah. I gotta go ahead.
I was just going to say it's the same as wearing a t-shirt. We both had to wear a t-shirt today. You've chosen a very fitting Iron Man t-shirt. We've spoken about Iron Man, and I picked my Secret Santa present this year, and it says I just felt like running, and it has a picture of Forrest Gump on it. And you know what? It made me so happy to get this t-shirt. And I've worn it a lot since Christmas, and I put it on today, and I had that feeling that this is a mindful action, and how special is it that we can wear our favorite t-shirts when we want them. And I think that food is in the same vein. I really do. And I think if we're not happy with what we're wearing or what we're eating, if we are in a place to change that, what an amazing thing.
And I got a funny story is how I actually found you, how I ran into your YouTube channel is through birthday cake flavored gel and Hayden Maples. Do you remember that story? Can you tell? You want me to tell? You want to tell?
No, go ahead, Ben.
So it's I Hayden Maples has been on my podcast, and I recently actually when he kind of when this whole situation happened, and he had commented, I think, on Instagram or about a video you had posted. This guy commented on my eating, you know. So I'm like, okay, what's this? So I click on it, and you've been doing, apparently, I didn't know it at the time, but reviews of different flavors of gels, and you happen to do a review on birthday cake flavored goo, I think,
Yeah,
and you weren't a fan, and Hayden commented that it's his favorite or something like that. And your comment back, which was like, of course, this crazy ultra runner guy, there's a certain niche that's after this flavor. Is that how
absolutely.
you is that how you remember it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I, yeah, I definitely found a box being ticked in my mind that was, who would eat this gel? And there it was in plain view. It was fantastic.
Yeah, I've had that flavor once. And actually, no, I don't. No, I actually haven't. And I was thinking through the whole thing. So like the race I'm after is a backyard ultra, which I've done one. I'm quite happy with my results. I'm trying to push that limit. And watching your video, I'm like, I would hate that flavor. Like I don't like birthday cake flavor in general. I don't like there's nothing I would like about it. But then I'm like, but that's exactly what I want on that run. Something to just shock the system. And I'm like,
Yeah,
oh, I think your review actually talked me into it.
absolutely. You know what? I think that, in those later yards of a backyard ultra, I think if you were to, I mean, it's pretty good, probably to take one on every lap. I guess in the later stages, you probably want to keep it topped up.
The hard part about, which has been a whole challenge for me, is you absolutely get to a point where your body doesn't want the food anymore. And gels for me quickly become the thing I don't want anymore. Like I can't swallow them. I can't get them down. Those I take them early on, and usually about, I want to say this last time around 50, 60 miles in, it's just like, I don't want anything to do with a gel. And I need more real foods, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I'm sure that would be a breaking point for so many people, But I think if you were to start introducing, these are all flavors from Goo, by the way. Campfire s'mores, birthday cake. They also do an espresso flavor. If you were to start throwing those in, your body would just be, your central governor would again put the hands up and just say, you know what, you're on your own, because
Yeah.
that is a shock.
Absolutely. I can see it as a shock to, and I do want, that actually is something that, there's times, especially when I'm going through the night. So it's, I've been up for, it's 2 a.m. in the morning, and I'm not in the mood for running,
Yeah,
and I'm getting sleepy, just to have something to shock, even if I can't swallow it down, just wake me up.
absolutely. Yeah, I think it's an incredible feat. And while we're on the subject, then I think, I really take my hat off to you guys who do the overnight stuff, because one of the saving graces I have in the marathon is that no matter how hard it's going to be, I'm going to be in my own bed that night, and that to me is the best feeling. Like when you've recovered, you've got the medal around your neck, and you're back in bed. That's fantastic. But for you guys, you're not even going back to your own bed. You're running. Like that's ridiculous. So honestly, I commend you. I don't know how you do it.
Well,
Incredible.
I also don't know how you do it. So like I mean, I have a marathon I do every year. It's always humbling for me. I keep getting a PB, but it's humbling because I don't really train for it. And it's something about running at that higher heart rate for a longer period of time, even though you're trying to stay in your zones. Um, just how uncomfortable that is. But then again, I choose to do something where I know at some point I'm gonna hit that wall, and have to push through that wall over and over and over again. And at some point in the backyard ultra, it ends when you finally quit. It's you against you. Unless you can win the thing, you have to decide to quit. But I'm running. The one thing I got to say though, the one advantage I think I have over you is, even though you're unique in my experience. So when I've run marathons, early on you're with a group, you're kind of running around the same amount of people. Then everybody spreads out, and I feel like I'm alone. Where like a backyard ultra, every hour I'm back with everybody. We're all hanging out. We're all doing the same kind of strategy. I'm with different people. I'm literally having conversations as we're walking up hills. I feel like I get more community out of it. But in your races and some of your reviews, you've talked actually about the community and the people you've been running with, and I find it interesting.
Yeah, there's so much to be said for that communal aspect of those things. But I think, I've got no plans of doing anything ultra. Honestly, I think that I read the other day Courtney DeWater is going to be doing the Western States 100 this year, and I can't wait to see her do it. I don't want to be her. I'm not envious of her at all. She looked so happy when she got place and she was there. Can't wait for Western State. I just thought that is my worst nightmare. 160k, 100 miles. I don't know how anyone would do it, but I think in that same regard, the Berkeley marathons, I think the marathon for Sam's, all of these things are just so above and beyond anything else. The marathon is still a ridiculous feat, and I will say anyone that attempts to run anything over a 5k has my respect, because it's a bloody long way. But I will say that the marathon for me is a comfortable distance. I enjoy it. I would rather run a marathon tomorrow than a 5k time trial, to be quite honest. As you mentioned there, Ben, you start a marathon at a zone and your heart rate just gradually increases. And if you hit the last K at 180 beats per minute, it doesn't really matter, because you've only got one more K to go. And that's usually what happens. Whereas, what you're doing in a backyard is like probably going into zone 3 once an hour for like half an hour.
Even that. No, if anything, you're almost trying to stay in zone 1. Like you have to average an 11-minute mile. Now it's the one I do is on a trail, and it's quite technical. So I mean, you can't go too fast, and there's some very steep hills here and there, but you're just trying to keep the minimal pace as long as you can go. And then, but if you want to rest, I mean, some of the elite guys will run a fast loop to get a half hour sleep or something, like the thing that's interesting in kind of looking at what we're both doing. You can pull up a training plan. There's lots of different training plans. There's so much information on how to do a marathon faster. To hit this speed, you have to do this and this and this. The stuff I'm doing, I think one of the attractions for me is there's nothing out there. Good luck.
Yeah, pretty much. And the funny thing is as well is that like the best in the business, Courtney DeWater is a great example of this. David Goggins, again, someone I always have to mention. They never really have too much useful information to give, to be honest. Not that they're useless people, like they're both incredibly full of wisdom, but it's always really abstract takeaways. Courtney DeWater will probably tell you to like wear longer shorts and smile or something like that.
Drink more beer and eat more pizza.
Absolutely. David Goggins will probably swear a lot, and that'll be it. But in the same regard, I think that the ultra is something so far beyond something rational to do. you know, and I haven't quite got the mental capacity for that yet. You know, running still is a healing mechanism for me. It's something that it does make me happy, and I'm not sure I'm in a place yet to miss out on sleep because of running. But again, Ben, you have my hat off because I'm incredibly impressed.
Well, my hat's off. My hat's off already. But I like you said, running a 5K, training for a 5K seems more miserable to you than a marathon. And my son was training for the military, and he had to do a 2 mile time thing. And I remember just thinking that would be the worst thing to train for. Like I couldn't imagine training for a 2 mile. Like like that. What a miserable distance that is. You're redlining, and you got to hold that red line. And I look at marathon training as the same thing. Now it's like my little brother to what I'm doing now. It's like, oh, that's so miserable compared to this running that I'm doing now. It's all perspective. And I like you said, I take my hats off to anybody, and I would even put that if you run a step or two. I mean, there's how often do I hear, "Oh, I can't run. My knees won't let me run. I have this, I have that." You hear these excuses. It's like you could run 2 steps probably. Well, if you can run two, can't you run four? Can't you run six?
Yeah,
Like, and that's for me. That's how it progressed. I mean, you jumped right into it, but it started small and it got bigger and bigger. Um, I think running's a difficult pursuit. It's a mental challenge, but I think that's a good thing. I think we should have more mental challenges in life.
absolutely. And it doesn't get any easier. We just get faster. We go for longer, and it's um, it's a game with ourselves. I think there's a beautifully stoic thing about running that I'd like to remember more. To be honest, it's quite often that I forget this and have to remind myself before it's too late. But you know, if you're going to go and play a game of tennis, a one-on-one sport, you will probably be at your own detriment if you arrive at that game wanting to win, in the belief that if you were to, or sorry, in comparison, if you were to arrive with a stoic mentality that you're going to be playing to your best ability, then there's a slightly more leeway to concede those points gracefully and not to lose your head that you're so hung up on winning. If you can just practice that bit of stoicism that, like, I can trust myself that I'm going to be the best I can be at this tennis today. And I think it's the same with running. I think that, you know, I'm in many ways, I'd love to be in a competitive place in running, but I also think that it is this very individualistic task that I can approach with stoic, at least a stoic reminder to myself that, you know, I can only extract from this what I put in, and I need to be graceful about it because, you know, to beat myself up on the start line that things haven't gone right, you know, it's only myself. And I think that's something really important for us all to just remember there. Like, it is completely uh, individualistic, and I think that's so important.
In a couple of your videos, you talked about finding gratitude and peace, which I think is such a great. I think it's a byproduct whether you're aiming for it or not, but being aware of it even makes it more profound.
Yeah, yeah. I think that gratitude. In fact, I know that there's been some amazing papers written about gratitude and compassion and the effects they have on our performance in a cognitive sense, but also physically. A recent study showed that um, those that practiced gratitude or compassion before entering a test that required memory, just a series of cognitive functions, they were more likely to exert 40% more effort or time onto that task if they had practiced gratitude or compassion. If they hadn't practiced those, you know, just very quick, you know, in this case, acts of mindfulness, or, you know, being shown pictures that would induce that reaction, their performance, you know, decreases 40%, or they're 40% less likely to commit time to that task. And that to me seems obvious that, we don't have much time in our days. 24 hours isn't a lot of time. And believe me, man, like I have been struggling with the amount of time I've had lately with the work and the running. And what I found in that time is that actually to take those small moments to appreciate having my lunch, having my snacks, taking on my fixed hydration before my runs, this newfound love for taking on electrolytes, it's been massive to my recovery, to my to my well-being. These guys have sponsored me, but I really, would urge you all to look into electrolytes if you haven't already. That task every day has been so rewarding to me, and that really has given me a sense of this is why I'm doing it. It's that perspective, it's that self-awareness, and I think that I really do believe that when we find gratitude, there is peace to be found, and it's not a evangelistic term in that sense. It's not about I guess trusting the higher powers or anything like that. It's more about, if we stay in this mindset that there is something to be grateful for, if we can see that silver lining, then I think we're giving ourselves a massive opportunity to doing better. I think is an understatement. I think to live, I think is the foundation. I really do.
So, I mean, you mentioned David Goggins, and I'll every once in a while I'll catch a video of his, and I did his audiobook. I want to say I read it, but I listened to it. And anytime I hear him, it gets me motivated. Like I'm pumped. Like let's go, right? But that's a short, fading fuse. It doesn't. That's not what gets me up every day. That's not. When it happens, I get a little burst. But I'm interested in what is it that gets you kind of going with all this stuff when it's. What is your motivation? Is it even motivation? Is it discipline? What is it that you've found that keeps you going, that other in a place that I would say most don't have?
Oh, it's absolutely healing. It really is, Ben. I think I really related to Goggins' story. For those that haven't read either of his two books, I would really recommend. I haven't read the second, but Can't Hurt Me, his first book, is fantastic. And I read that actually shortly after I spoke to my family about what happened to me as a child, about my sexual assault. And I think to read that David Goggins had been through some awful abuse and trauma as a child, and to hear how that manifested into his life and actually made him very unhappy. It took him a long time before he was able to crack that mold that he built for himself. And I realized David Goggins' story is one of healing. I think that he's still healing, and I think that is a vulnerability that perhaps isn't shown so much in his videos. You probably see his viral videos on Instagram, like insane supersets he does in the gym, or like his amazing endurance running feats. But I really think that running can be a healing mechanism. I think it has been for me. It probably won't be for everyone, but I think it's funny. I really identified with runners before I got sober, before I quit smoking. I really loved watching Diamond League. I used to love watching like Super League Triathlon, and these were all things that I really loved, these athletic endeavors, before I was ever an athlete myself. So as soon as I bought myself a pair of clipping pedals for my bike, and as soon as I actually went out and bought some running shoes that weren't just hand-me-downs from my dad, I suddenly felt like an athlete. And actually, I have so much inner peace, and I consider myself to be a pretty cool guy because I'm an athlete. And I hope that I can keep that same, I guess, individualistic. That's a word I'm really struggling to say today. But that same pride, I think, in who I am. I identify as a athlete, as a runner, and I hope I can keep that past my running days. Hopefully I can coach or, help runners out. But I do think that that's who I want to be. I never wanted to be an alcoholic. I never wanted to be someone that was a victim, and wore or bore the scars, not physically. I had a very broken mind, and I never liked to identify as that person. Whereas being a runner, especially a marathon runner, is someone that I really like being. And I think for me, I think that is something that's a huge thing. And I think we can all do that. And you don't have to be anything special to call yourself an athlete. I think anyone can. And I think everyone should.
I know I haven't figured it all out, but there is absolutely a connection between how your own body image, how you see yourself, how you define yourself, and just with like when I fast, like if I just fast for the day, or I go for a run, or some of the accomplishments I've done, like just being able to look at myself with a sense of pride, like I just did that, I did something. And it's usually, I want to say that you only get pride in that sense through doing something that's slightly difficult. It needs some difficulty to it to really achieve that real pride. If it was just an easy thing, if it's just given to you, you don't feel that. I don't think it's worth as much. But I definitely noticed that when I'm at my best, when I feel my best, it's usually because I've done something. I've done some kind of challenge. I've accomplished something. And Goggins is, yeah, I think you bring up a great point that it is what was it, a path of recovery, amazing path of self-discovery and accomplishment. And there's a lot to be taken from that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Self-worth, I think, is a massive thing there. But I've been, I love Strava, and I've been using it quite religiously now for quite some time. And I like to label my runs. I like to take that time after I've been training to talk about what I've been doing. And I think in many ways this helps me to be grateful for what I've just done. But I think also I've been using this term pennies in the well for my easy mileage. And I was thinking about this term. Marathon training it's definitely has an end result in sight. Sorry, the clues in the name. It's definitely queued up for that big day. 11 weeks in and 5 weeks out, all of that kind of stuff. But I think forgetting that the easy mileage, like yesterday, or a couple of days ago, sorry, I ran like a 20-kilometer just midweek easy run, and it's 12 miles, and it was just like pretty monotonous. It was nothing special, no intervals, just easy pace. And to be honest, it was hard. It was one of the hardest runs I've done in the whole training block. And it was only near the end that I was reminding myself that this is pennies in the well. This is the wishing well. And I'm just flicking those gold coins in. Nothing might come of this. When we throw the coins into the wishing well, it's the act of doing it that matters. We fully well know that wishing well probably won't grant us our wish. But walking to the well itself, taking a moment to look at it, to appreciate it, to invest that time, I think that is enough. And I think we have to be able to remember that, when it comes to the training. And when I'm writing the pennies in the well on the Strava, I have to be able to leave my running shoes outside, walk indoors, and be satisfied with what I've just done. Because I think it's incredibly important to just take that time to be at one with each of those runs. I really do think it's so important. And as I say, for me, it's healing, but it doesn't take away from the fact that, mentally I feel strong. I've meditated today. I've been out and I've let my mind be at one, and I've been able to fight off the central governor for another day and, finish my run. But I think overall it's, yes, the community aspect, as we said, sharing your runs with other runners and having that kudos, I think is really special.
Do you think so? Do you think there's value in, and I'm not even sure, I haven't thought this through myself, in sharing, you have a YouTube channel. I'm interested in what you think your goals were, or what have your goals and what you had when you started it to where you're at changed. Is it? But I do think there is something for me, like just talking through some of this stuff with like-minded individuals, and even if nobody, for me, if nobody watches my videos, I get a benefit out of it. But I think there's also possibly some value of just airing your thoughts and your feelings and putting it out there, which I got to say, in your video, is something I really appreciate, is how real you come across. It isn't this look at me and how fast I run kind of. It's a real connection I feel to you, like you're sharing some of your interpersonal demons and the struggles you've gone through and your successes. It's the full range. And yeah, I do appreciate watching your video. But what were your thoughts going into the channel, and where did it end, and what do you think you get out of it?
You, Ben, that's really kind of you. Regarding YouTube, quite a simple answer, really. I planned to move to Australia before I made the channel, and it honestly just seemed a way of sharing my running with my family. Honestly, I have a grandmother who is 85 this year. Hopefully she doesn't get angry if I've made her a year or two older than she is, but I think she's 85 this year, and she's so interested in my running and hearing what I get up to. And um, she when she was my age, I don't think life was too good for her. She'd been evacuated during the war, split up from her family, and um, she hasn't had the easiest life. And it really made me quite happy when I put the first video up and I could send it to her and say, I've started this thing and I'd love for you to watch it. And she's given me nothing but encouragement. In fact, it's all we talk about. It's all she wants to know from me is when's the next video. And she of course asked about Australia, but it means so much that I'm able to share the videos with her. In many regards, I've, wanted the channel to get more views and subscribes when I first started it. I think that was a natural, I guess, part of being a visual artist. As I said, I studied photography, and I've had some success in that field. I've sold some books in the past, some photo books, and I've taught. It's been fantastic. But I think that, my, I guess, value of success, what does it mean to me? I think that, when it comes to running and sharing what I hope to be, very personal experiences, I realized that, attaching a number of followers, I guess, into that realm doesn't really fit. It doesn't really match my intentions. To be honest, it's quite a nice reminder that is quite an, I guess in this regard, it's something that I know won't bring me value in the future. Of course, I'd love to financially make a bit of cash. That would be amazing from the videos. It is a passion project, but I think ultimately, if I were to stop enjoying it, but the videos did really well, that would be rubbish. And I really love making the videos now, and they, as like you said, if nobody watches the videos, like that is okay. And in a way, that's happened to me recently, and I'm kind of thinking it's strange how much I enjoy it, even when there's no conversation to be had from the video, or like, it's got no engagement. It's kind of meditation in itself, almost like it is purely for myself. And even then, it doesn't really provide anything for me, but I like it, and it's quite peaceful. So yeah, I think it sort of falls into, I guess, one of those practices, I guess, for us both that we can do regularly. And perhaps it's nice that there's not so much pressure.
And I just stands out to me, like this podcast for me is a way. It started off as kind of like getting to know local people, local runners, local like-minded people, and then it started, oh, let's have some family on, and then it's reaching out to people like you. Like I'm making connections that, like, I had a cousin on recently who I hadn't seen in years, who lives on the West Coast. And I had a 2.5 hour conversation with one of my closest relatives, that never would have happened otherwise. And I'm looking at, what you just said, your grandmother, you probably still would talk, but now you have something more. It's giving you, I mean, how valuable is that? You know what I mean? Like, if that's your one thing you get out of it, I mean, it's worth it, right?
And that's exactly it. And I think, the metric of success in this case, if I were to weigh up financially, how much I pay for the editing software, how much I pay for the GoPro, all of this stuff, if I were to weigh that up to the return, it's a bad investment. If I was to weigh up the time that I put into making them to what I get out, it's a bad investment. But I think overall, the enjoyment factor of the whole process is worth it. And I think that's a really special thing. And, in addition to that, just how, globally we can reach our audiences is amazing. The fact that we've been able to meet each other and, hopefully have an audience here today from around the world. I think that's a beautiful thing. And quite frankly, that's what I'm all about. I don't hope for any more than just to connect with others and share stories. Hopefully find some positivity along the way.
So I know right now, life outside of running, filmmaking, and work, there isn't much besides sleep. Um, I'm guessing at some point you hope that the work part, scales back a little bit. What are your other interests outside of that?
Photography, as I mentioned, is an absolute, that is definitely a love of mine. I guess it's something that is always in my mind. It's always an instrument, I guess, for me to express myself, to pursue creative endeavors. So I've always got sort of a notepad on the go, photographic ideas. So I'm really excited to get shooting once I finish this job in a couple of weeks. But I will say that the traveling is so close to my heart. It's so dear. I think to be in a country like Australia and not to take every opportunity to go and see more of the country, I think is quite criminal. So at the moment, I'm really, really keen on, almost finding situations that I find quite unappealing or maybe anxiety inducing, and I think that is a really good opportunity for me to go and learn and for me to actually, for example, experiencing nightlife. Since I've been sober, I've rarely been out because really, there's no reason to be out past like midnight. When you don't drink, you don't smoke, you don't do drugs, it's like there's not a whole lot else happening. But I guess those are the kind of environments while I'm in this country. And, I've only got 3 years here, man, and then I'm back in the UK, really, or at least on to the next place. I think right now I really do feel a passion to travel more.
I'm very interested in the photography stuff. So I listened to a podcast recently. I think it was Joe Rogan, and he had a photographer who has a YouTube channel, the White Underbelly or something like that. But he was talking about how he was taking photos, and then people would ask him stories about the photos. Like he's like, to me, every photo he was taking, or at least the good ones, had kind of a story behind it. So then he'd show people, and then people would ask about the story behind it, which then ended up becoming his YouTube channel. Like explaining the story behind the pictures, and it had me thinking, just like, because in my head, I guess I thought of photography as like, oh, that's pretty, let's take a picture of it. And then kind of hearing that podcast, I was like, oh, there's probably more to photography than I was aware of. Can you talk me through what photography kind of is to you, and what your, maybe you are going after what's beautiful and that's your shot, what you're hoping to capture. What is it that inspires you in photography?
Well, that's certainly a good starting point. I think finding something that you find beautiful or aesthetically pleasing, I think is always fantastic. And I think there's always room for more of that in the world. I absolutely don't criticize, stock imagery. I think it can be amazing. But I think for me, I definitely, as I lent into alcohol for answers, I think I definitely lent into photography, and it gave back so much. I think that my time studying, my time teaching, I I really found a healing within photography, and specifically within print. I'll give a story of perhaps one of my most potent moments as a photographer, and it was an amazing opportunity I had in my final year of university to actually travel and stay in Las Vegas for a week, to essentially bring to life this this image that I had of this place, Las Vegas. Everything that I've seen in the movies, in Casino, in The Hangover, these classic tapes of Elvis playing in Vegas. I was convinced that if I was to go to Vegas with nothing but my impressions of Vegas, I would be able to find my own sort of version of Las Vegas. What would it mean to me? And I was inspired to do this project, partly based on a novel that I'd read, beautiful novel called Beautiful Children by an author called Charles Bock. Grew up in Vegas. It's about missing children specifically that run away from home in their teenage years, something that I almost felt like I did, running away from my trauma. I was also partly inspired through this project because of a breakup that I'd had at the time that hit me quite hard. And in many ways, that breakup came as a result of my lack of being present, being able to, I guess, face my trauma. So I went to Vegas for this idea of finding, I guess, this Las Vegas that existed for me. What did it mean? How could I represent that through images? And I had in mind that I'd only wanted to come back with maybe 12 images, and these would be shot on film on my 6x6 twin lens camera. So square images, all in color. And in many ways, I think that I knew that I was lost at that point in time. I really related to these children in Charles Bock's book that had left home in pursuit of their own home or whatever they were trying to find. And I guess I was trying to find a place in the beautiful pastel hues and the neon lights and the just washed out tones that you find all throughout those, bit more rustic, quieter parts of Fremont at the end of the Las Vegas Strip. So the disused side of Vegas that was huge maybe 50 or 60 years ago. It's all down the other end now. But I was interested in this part. And that project went amazing. I made that, and I made some books. But it was while I was in Las Vegas for that project, and talking about being mindful here, this is a very particular day where I got talking to another photographer on the street who had seen me walking around Las Vegas with my camera. I think she'd recognized the cool camera I had, and she'd also seen me on Instagram. So it was really cool that we already had this sort of mutual interest. So we were chatting away, and she said, "Oh, I'd love to introduce you to some of my friends." She was from Vegas, and we immediately sort of had these common interests. As I said, my project in many ways was about me bringing to light this feeling of being lost. I'm not sure I had the words at the time verbally to tell my loved ones around me that I was lost. I didn't know what I was doing. Quite frankly, if I'd lost my passport in Vegas, I'm not sure I would have cared, because I didn't really know where I was mentally. I think I was nowhere really, and they were the images I produced. They're very lonely, very quiet. There's not a single person throughout my whole book. It's just landscape. And it was on this day that I was with my friend that I met in Las Vegas, and she took me to a studio, so like an open studio, where there was some beautiful work being made, sculpture, painting, spray painting. It was fantastic. And I had a roll of film in my camera that was quite precious to me. It was quite expensive. And I was aware that I was in this place where I wanted to shoot. I felt like there was something there. I didn't know what it was, but I was present enough to realize I should be shooting this. There was a man there who, he resembled Picasso so much. It was uncanny. It was incredible. He was Picasso with a Californian accent. And he had a pullover hoodie just covered in paint. And his hands were old, but they had this just youthfulness to them, like a spray painter in New York, you know, they're trying to hide their hands because they're covered in spray paint. He had this air of layers of spray paint over his hands, and I shot him from different angles, and I had a 35mm camera on me as well in black and white, and I shot some frames on that. And I talked to this guy, and his name was Alex, and I had this rapport with him, and I really felt like there was something really special there. And I spoke to Alex, and he told me his story about how he had been he'd worked in a casino in Las Vegas, and he'd been like a porter, nothing special, and he'd done this for years. This had been his career, and he had just been paying out wins essentially, and that being his job. And one day, at the hotel he worked at, I can't remember the name, but he saw a Picasso in the hotel. It's on exhibition, and that changed his life. It blew his mind. That was enough for him to give up his career and get into painting. And he was an incredible painter. It was absolutely beautiful, the work he was showing me, and I couldn't see enough of it. He was just flying through the pages. And it had only been about 5 years since he quit his job and taken on being a full-time painter, but he had exhibited, and he was so well known in the in that smaller district of Las Vegas. And so I came back home to the UK, and I graduated uni. I finished the book, and after that, I guess I was pretty satisfied with photography. I had a few smaller projects, but I guess I didn't really feel a sense of that project that I made in Vegas definitely stood out to me. That was one of my favorites, and there was something about being there, making those images, that was really special, and it always had a place in my heart. And it was only about 18 months after I'd been in Vegas that I got a message on Instagram from my friend that I'd met in Vegas, and she told me that Alex had passed away, and he'd actually got COVID, and he died. And she had asked me for some of those images to use for his memorial. And it was that moment that I realized that day when I was there shooting him, I needed to be there. And that to me transcended being a photographer, being an artist. But this is about a human issue. It's about having that spiritual connection. That day when he saw that Picasso, it changed his life. In a way, that was a trajectory for him to go onto his path, so I could meet him, so that he could leave a lasting impression on me. And I think that is what photography means to me. I think it's something that can't be put into words. And I could show you these images of Alex in his hoodie with his hands, and maybe at first they'd mean nothing to you, Ben, but I think by using what we have, using our voice, using our opportunity to communicate, I think we can we can really evolve past the image, and we can snowball into a universe.
I gotta say, like, having doing these podcasts, right, it always amazes me. I get to the end of them, and that's where the magic happens. I'm so happy I asked that question. Like, that's awesome. That wow, you literally just painted a picture for me, and it makes me think of just like this your waiting video, and I think some of the art I've kind of created, nothing special, nothing amazing, but like that process of creating, and then that connection to him, and just that. And I think of that guy. Imagine he had passed away before ever seeing that Picasso. Like, he found this special 5 year, whatever it was, 5-6 years in his life, where he got to explore himself and learn himself, and how lucky, and then, like you said, and passing that on to you. Very cool. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure.
Yeah. I've taken up way too much of your time, but I got to ask you. I want to ask one last about your Scot-Free Running, the name you chose for your podcast. For your YouTube channel. Can you talk me through what that means? I've listened to a little. you've explained it on some of your videos, but I think I'd really like to hear it again.
Quite simply, nothing is scot-free. Nothing is without consequence. And I think that we can take into account accountability and balance, equilibrium, and positive, negative, cause and effect. All of these things exist in every part of our life. And I think that awareness, I think, is number one. I think if we can be self-aware, if we can have a clear view of what's happening. We spoke about the food on our plate. Where has it come from? You know, what is it going to do to me? What are these relationships in my life? What do they give me? What do I take from them? I think all of these things are just, if we can't give the time to evaluate in this kind of detail, I really struggle to see a point to begin with. And to me, I think that running is one of the most valuable things. And I think it's such a sensitive subject. And I think sensitivity is at the heart of Scot-Free Running, because I don't approach any of this lightly. I think putting myself in front of a camera, I make myself accountable. And I represent a huge demographic. You know, we can't help but being white men with a voice, we're in a place of privilege, and actually we've got a great opportunity to share everything, you know, and to teach. And I think that in my case, Scot-Free Running, I hope for it to be, you know, go and do the mileage, be careful, you might get injured, you know, do the stretching, but don't overdo it. Sleep is so important. You've got to be able to hit off one or the other, because it's like not everything is that linear in that sense. There's not always going to be an answer, but I really think that it's just having that accountability. You know, I took me a long time to speak about things that had happened to me, to speak about trauma, to speak about the abuse. But you know, if you were to ask anyone about you know, their trauma or their abuse, they'll tell you that there's two sides to it. There always is. And I would hate ever for someone to feel like I did for many years and think there was one side to this, that I was a victim, that I was a survivor, and that was it. Because there's so much more to it than that. You know, there's everything I've learned, there's that pride that I spoke about. And I think that there is always something, there's always a balance. And I think in this universe, I think that exists for all of us. But I don't think anything is scot-free. I don't think anything is without a consequence.
Yeah, I mean, I name mine BOPTMN, right? Which is kind of like Benjamin and optimum, and I kind of felt like I was in the beginning. It was a physical pursuit, like I'm trying to physically find what optimal is in that pursuit, and it didn't take long before I realized that there's a mental pursuit to that. There's a connection to that. There's, I mean, everything you're saying about your name, Scot-Free Running, like I couldn't help but see the similarities there and kind of what we were thinking behind them. And it's a cool journey. I would highly recommend anybody to follow you on YouTube, Instagram. I really appreciate what you do. I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate you coming on with me. This has been a really cool experience. To reach out to somebody across the globe, I thought we'd have more lag issues. This has been a great experience. Thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you, Ben. It's been a pleasure, and I'd love to speak to you again soon.
Great. And literally I could just do one on just photography stuff. Like that was, please, can you share that photo with me?
I'd love to. Yeah.
Because I have this image in my head of what I think it is, and I can't wait to see it. You know, that will I be surprised? Will it be just what I thought? And now knowing that story behind it, and I would recommend to you, as you go forward in your photography journey, share those behind the stories. That was amazing stuff. That was cool. Goosebumps.
I appreciate that, Ben. Well, there's lots more where that came from. So I look forward to the next one.
Have a great evening. Good luck on your journey. I can't wait to see you crack 250 and then what's beyond that. Because yeah, you're putting up some awesome numbers.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate it, man. See you soon.
Bye.
Peace.